don't know if my podcast wife and podcast husband are coming.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Okay, so we'll get this started. Hello, everyone. I'm Paul Rook, and this is the Mysterious Worlds podcast talk show. As you can see, I'm joined in the studio with Bethan Briggs Miller. Hello, Bethan.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Hello. No problem. Not at all. So let's start at the beginning. What is it you like to do in the paranormal? And how did you get started?
Well, I like to think of myself as the Giles of the paranormal world. I don't go out and do the investigations. I'm more like in the library or behind a book, trying to find out like the history, the folklore of the area, and make connections with what they find out. So yeah, I'm very much behind the scenes.
Okay, cool. So so you like to do a lot of the research side of it. I'm very much like that myself. I used to go out and about and do the paranormal investigations, but I think social media sort of ruined that a little bit. So I've taken a step back and I tend to do some of the research side of it, and especially do like these podcasts or vodcasts or whatever they call them now. I don't know.
Vodcasts.
Vodcasts, I don't know. And just get to talk to people like yourself, really, and find out what you got, how you guys got into the paranormal. So
it's quite nice, the community for the paranormal and folklore. I found there's not really any gatekeeping. I thought there would be like these mythical, like, elders of the paranormal who were like, oh, these young ones coming in. But no, actually everyone's been like super eager that people want to get involved, which has been really nice.
Yeah, absolutely. It is, isn't it? So what got you started on this paranormal research path?
Well, I have a bit of a show and tell for that. Hang on.
Ooh.
So I think it's a mixture of two things. I grew up in a haunted house, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute. And then I went to a charity shop when I was would have been about 10 or 11, and it was closing down. And it specialised in books. And in the corner of the charity shop, on its front was a very dusty book. And I just went and happened to pick it up. And it was this, The Folklore of Glamorgan, where I grew up. And they never tell you this bit in school. If you heard about half the horrific, wonderfully gory, macabre things that happen, history would have been the best lesson ever. So I think that's what got me interested in the sort of like the outside bits of history in the area, and it sort of stayed with me. I kept buying more books. I've actually now run out of space for my books. I'm having to constantly buy new bookcases, and then couple that with the house I grew up in, which was a very old cottage in Wales, about 250 years old. And it was in a ironworkers. There was an ironworks nearby, so it would have been the ironworkers' cottage. And it was only 2 up, 2 down, and there'd have been about 11 people living in it at one point. And just the high mortality rate of the area, with the mines, the smelting, all sorts going on around us. And then our house had its fair share of ghosts, and there were some that you could definitely see were almost like a time slip, like stone tape theory, like you were just witnessing like perhaps a little glimpse at the past. But a couple of times you almost interacted with them. Whenever we did anything new to the house, there was a lady in a green dress who used to come and visit, and you always got the sense that she was checking out what you were doing. Because my mum and dad were putting it back to how it was, because the house was gutted in the 50s. It was they pulled down all the old lovely beams and took out the iron fire, took out all the beautiful features. But mum and dad,
blasphemy, that is, isn't it?
Blasphemy. I mean, half the street was these lovely stones, and then one house was pebble dashed, which breaks your heart.
It does, doesn't it?
But there was one entity in the house that wasn't very nice, and that was in my room. So I grew up with something that used to hit me, get into bed with me, and I'd leave the room for 2 minutes, come back, and everything would be turned upside down. I would get a strange, like, voice on the phone come on and shout if I was in that room. It was always cold. Like, you know, when you walk into a greenhouse and the air feels, it's like it hits you like that.
Yeah, yeah, the atmosphere is really thick.
Thick,
Yeah,
that's it. So imagine a
yeah.
cold version of that.
Okay.
And they had loads of people come out to find out what was wrong with it. It was a small room. It was only about
Mm,
5 by 8, really tiny little box room. I just had my TV. I was an only child, so I had my bedroom and a little TV room
yeah.
with all my videos. And yeah, it had a huge radiator in there. I could never find out why it was so cold in there. And really, there was a grinning face that used to appear just in the middle of the room, and above
Okay.
your head, it would just, you turn around and this grinning face would be there. And I think my parents didn't disbelieve me, but I think there was an element of, oh, she's been watching those scary films again. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Every Saturday night, down Blockbusters.
Yeah.
Blockbusters, remember that? And,
Absolutely. Good
you know,
old days.
it was really cool at 15 if you got away with like renting out an 18. Do you remember? It was like,
Yeah.
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 So they probably thought, oh, she's been watching too many of those. But years later, this is after I moved out. So I'm now living down in Essex, and I
Yeah.
had a phone call off mum and dad. And it turned out that my mum had just had a knee operation. And when I moved out, they sort of turned that room into like a little spare room.
Yeah.
And she couldn't sleep in next to dad because he kept moving into her knee. So she said, oh, cramped, I'm going to go and sleep in the spare room because you're getting on my nerves. So she was in there and she was reading a book. And she bent over to put the book down
Hmm.
and turned out the light. And as she turned out the light, the room went like almost like, 70s horror film, the breath in the air and
Yeah.
the shivering. And she said something crawled up the wall and then crawled across the ceiling, landed on the end of her bed. She felt the weight go down and
Yeah.
it crawled up to her face and said, "Get out." And she did
Wow.
on a broken leg. And
I think
then
I would.
I think we all would. And it was probably that grinning face thing. It felt old and it didn't feel like the rest of the things in the house. I don't like how these days it's quite trendy to jump to demon.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. Yeah, I don't like
It's
that.
it's sensationalism, but I don't know quite
Yeah.
how else to describe it. I think it was more elemental,
Okay.
ancient, like patient. And because I
Yeah.
was a very boring teenager, I wasn't rebellious at all. I think it was probably bored stiff because you hear about they feed off like teenage angst. Well, I was very boring. It was like, oh God,
Yeah.
she's watching Lord of the Rings for the 60th time. But
I think
they,
I've experienced something a bit similar to that. We was at
oh
Rye Gatehouse, and I can't see or hear spirit or anything like that myself. But in the basement level and the stairs coming up to the main gatehouse level,
yeah,
there was a spirit there. My medium that was with us, a very good friend of mine, and I trust her completely. She said that it wasn't a spirit of a person as you would think a person would be. It's almost like this spirit's been here so long that it's forgotten how to be a human.
well, that makes sense. Yeah,
And it's sort of like a feral human, for want of a
I
better
like
word.
that feral spirit. It's sort of lost
Yeah,
its humanity.
yeah. And that sort of had the same effect on that particular area. So
Oh, I like that.
yeah, that does sound familiar.
Well, they asked their local priest to come and bless the house and didn't tell him what had happened because they thought, God, we're going to sound absolutely nuts.
Yeah,
So they just said, can you just come and bless the house? And he went around all the rooms, did the usual just blessing, got to that room, and he said, oh, you didn't tell me about this room. There's something different in here. And he said, I need you to go downstairs and stay downstairs. And he was in there for 45 minutes and it turned into a full exorcism, apparently.
wow.
He was quite
That
ill
that that would have
afterwards.
been yeah, that would have been really impressive to see. I know
Yeah,
they like
I
to do that
know.
stuff in secret though, don't they?
They do. Well, mum and dad didn't tell me about it straight away. When we went up to visit, and I went into that room because there was a little sink in there, and I went to the loo
Mm,
upstairs and went into that room. And I was always a bit nervous about going into that room because there was a mirror on the wall, and I always used to think, "Oh, I'm going to see it. I'm going to see it in the mirror."
yeah.
And I was startled. It felt different. It was warm, and it was like there was it had changed, and I didn't know at this point that they'd had an exorcism. So I
Yeah.
went downstairs and was like, "That's really weird. Have you finally found out why that room is so cold?" And then they said, "Oh, interesting. You should say that."
So
So
whatever it was worked.
whatever it was worked, and we'd
Yeah.
even met like previous owners of the house, and they said, "Oh, how are you getting on with that back room?" So we weren't the only ones.
Yeah. Did they tell you about it before you moved in, though?
No.
They probably just
That
want
would have made
shock.
me want to buy it more, though. I'm that type of like, oh wow, it's haunted. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, we'll have
That's
it.
it. It's just put it down to a bit of character and move in
Yeah.
anyway.
So
Oh,
yeah, I
dear.
suppose like the mixture of that and just the local folklore, I was bound to end up doing something like
Mm,
this.
absolutely. Was it obviously you got that book? Was it the folklore of your area where you was?
Yes, yes, it was
Okay.
Glamorgan.
Okay. So
Um,
what's is there any particular favourite folklore that you liked or actually delved deeper into it?
it's gonna sound really like quite gory, but I really like death omens.
Okay.
Like, especially in Wales. I'm giving a talk actually, hopefully at the next ASAP conference about how the high mortality rates of areas that have places like mining, or as I said, the ironworks,
Hmm.
how death being an everyday occurrence changed the folklore of the area. It sort of reflected it, like bit chicken
Yeah.
and egg, what came first. But a lot of folklore that I know about is about looking for signs of death. So, and it can come in all different ways. So there's the Cahiraith, which is an audible warning, which comes in on the waves, and that's sort of like his impending shipwrecks.
Hmm.
And there's quite a few places that has a smell, like the Morpher Pit colliery disaster had a smell in it in the weeks leading up to the disaster from a death flower.
Okay.
And there's also like these feelings. So it's very centered on the senses in Wales.
Hmm.
And like most places in Britain, actually the world, the old black dog makes an
The black
appearance.
shark. Yeah.
The Shuck, yeah.
Um.
Now I
Yeah.
live in Essex, so I've gone to Shuckland.
Absolutely. I've been to Bungay. Is it Bungay?
Oh yeah, I'm
The
hopefully going there
church.
soon.
Yeah, I went there.
Did you see the claw marks in the door?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I see
Yeah, that's
those.
a fab story,
Um,
isn't it?
I think if I remember rightly, they've actually got it inside the church.
Yeah.
So you have to go inside the church now. We had a little look around some churches. We visited a few churches there.
There's some
Um,
great folklore in the churches around here. I mean,
Absolutely.
Borley gets all the notoriety in Essex, but I'm probably going to be. This is like sacrilegious now. I think it's boring, boring, boring. I don't understand. I know Harry Price got involved, but I don't
Hmm.
understand how it gets the sort of following it does, because there's
I
other
think it's
churches around that have got far more.
yeah. I think there's with Borley, you're not able to go up to the rectory anymore because it is just ruins and it's in
Yeah.
private. It's on private land,
Mm.
so you're not allowed to go there. It's a small village. The people don't like ghost hunters going up there.
No, they really don't, do they?
No. I was actually lucky enough to work with the villagers and do a couple of tours around
Mm.
Borley. And looking into the place, the actual church isn't the same location as it is now. It was over
No, it's
in
changed,
the
isn't it?
in the next field, I think it was.
Mm.
So I've done a bit of investigation work there. Um, but
Well, if you
we
come
was up.
down this way again, I'll have to take you. There's Runwell, where a priest
Yeah.
melted. There's Langenhoe, where the priest was embraced by a naked woman and was chased out of the. There's one bit where it says he felt the organ and it was warm to the touch, and I had a bit of a giggle about that because some you got I got a
Absolutely.
very childish sense of humour.
There's
But
quite a few. I mean, I came from Basildon, so South Essex,
oh,
not too far away. There's a few churches in Basildon or just
there
outside
is.
Basildon that are quite prolific haunting wise.
We did look at
Um,
one in our monk episode with Erie Essex.
all
There's a
right,
monk
okay.
that appears in a field and then will walk across the road, and so many people